The Calling by Brayley Parkinson. Prologue. Boston, Massachusetts, 2001. The wind was strong and bitter, almost pushing Ashlynn to the ground as she made her way towards Lucky's Bar and Grill. She struggled to keep her balance on the busy sidewalk, pulling her jacket closer around her in an attempt to stay warm. Annoyed with her roommate, she couldn't understand why they had to meet at a bar. Layla was well aware of how much Ashlynn disliked the city, yet she had called just 20 minutes ago, pleading, "Hurry up and come." "What's so urgent?" Ashlynn asked. "Just trust me. Can't this wait until you get home?" "No. You need to come now. Someone else is here to explain everything to you." "Who?" "Just come, okay? He'll make it worth your while." Layla ended the call abruptly, leaving Ashlynn little choice but to throw on some clothes and head to Lucky's. It sounded like money was involved. She'd recently lost her job, and in order for something to be worth her while, it needed to involve money. Hopefully, it was a fair and legal opportunity to make enough to pay rent that month. She and Layla, her roommate since freshman year in college, had moved to Boston a month after graduation. Neither wanted to leave their home state of Michigan, but they hadn't been able to find jobs. Unfortunately, the position Ashlynn had eagerly started just months before had already ended. Now she was in limbo, picking up whatever temporary job she could find. If she wasn't locked into a lease with Layla, she would have already headed back to Detroit. Lucky's was an old hole-in-the-wall bar that was consistently disputing health department findings. Most patrons knew it was a great place to get slightly cheaper drinks, but it was best to avoid the food. Ashlynn fought off anxiety as she entered the dark, dank bar. Every place in this city is always so busy, she thought, longing for the slower pace of her Midwestern hometown. Her eyes quickly adjusted to the dimness as she scanned the room, and a song she knew but couldn't remember the name of was barely audible in the background. While she was looking for Layla, a hand gripped her shoulder. "Ash, you aren't going to believe this," Layla said, pulling her towards the back of the bar. Layla's eyes were larger than usual, which was saying something. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "No, but something big is happening. Come on." Layla grabbed Ashlynn's hand and led her down a narrow hallway that was lined with small booths for two. Just before the bathrooms, a man with dark slick-back hair and beady eyes stood up and said, "Good. We got her." Seeing that Layla's boss, Ian Banks, was the someone else she had spoken of, disgusted Ashlynn. He ran a low-budget rag of a newspaper that published gossip and rumors. That wouldn't have been so bad if they were upfront and told readers their content was based on rumors, but they never disclosed that fact. "Ian." "Hi," Ashlynn said through clenched teeth. Layla pushed her into the booth and plopped down, paying no mind to personal space. "So, I know you don't want to work for me, but I got a story that I think you'd want to write yourself because it's a topic that's near and dear to your heart." She rolled her eyes. "I have no intention of writing anything for a rumor mill." "It's more than that," Layla said, turning to Ashlynn. Her eyes looked like giant emeralds, her forehead creased with frustration. She and Ashlynn had argued many times over the town crier, but just like Ashlynn, Layla had struggled in the tough job market. She still had the job she'd taken after graduation, but her hours had been cut in half. Supplementing her income with part-time work at the town crier had kept her afloat. "I bet you will change your mind after I tell you this," Ian said. "What if I told you we're doing a story on the church?" "I'd say so. What does that have to do with me?" "Well, it's dealing with a delicate subject, and as a Catholic, I'd think you'd want to be the one to present it. You know, show both sides of the issue." Ashlynn opened her mouth to protest, but stopped short when she thought about her half of the rent. Boston was expensive, and she and Layla were barely scraping by. The job she'd taken at a prestigious but highly experimental school had been low-paying and nightmarish, but it had paid the bills. Without a steady paycheck, she lived in a constant state of fear. Now she was surviving on temporary jobs. She didn't care for what Ian did, but it would be silly to not hear him out. "I'll bite." "What is it?" Supposedly, a big story is going to break soon about the church. Something about a priest who was involved in weird stuff, and the church knew about it. What type of weird stuff? Some organization that started back during the free love movement. It sounds really sketchy, and it's not something any priest or really any person should be involved in. It's criminal, if you know what I mean. Ashlynn knew exactly what he meant. She shook her head. Sounds ridiculous. There are always rumors about priests and the Catholic Church. Why would anyone care about gossip? A small woman with short dark hair and a black apron slung low on her waist came over to their table. "Hey, what can I get you?" she asked while holding a pen over a small notepad. "Ladies, what do you say to a couple of drinks? Something heavier than beer since we're talking business," Ian suggested. Ashlynn sighed. Ian sounded like the average low-rate hustler who always thought he was doing big business. "Fine. Order up," Ashlynn said. "3 Manhattans, please." The waitress nodded and headed off without looking up from the notepad. "So, my proposition to you is to find out if this story is true or not. You detail your investigation and report on it. You get the first juicy story out before the end of the year, and I'll pay you a fair amount. If the story really takes off like I think it will, you'll probably have interviews and book deals lined up within a few months." An investigation. You think I can just call up the local bishop and ask if he's got a guy on staff who's molesting boys? Ashlynn leaned across the table. "So here's the thing to know. I'm not really a Catholic. I like the culture. I grew up with it, but I'm non-committal when it comes to following all the rules. I go to midnight mass for Christmas because it feels like the right place to be, but that's about the extent of my activity with the church." "Wait a minute. Layla told me you went to Catholic school. You two graduated from some Catholic college in Michigan, right?" "Yeah, but it was a Jesuit institution." "What does that mean?" "It means there wasn't a lot of Catholicism at our Catholic school," Layla giggled. Ashlynn nodded. "I know the faith, but I don't practice it." "That's perfect. You're not too attached. That means you can get to the truth. Layla tells me you're all about finding the truth." "She is." Layla looked at her. Ashlynn wondered why Layla was so excited about this. "Don't you want to know if this church is evil or not? Think about it. The teachings have shaped you, and regardless of what you say, I bet, in 10 years you'll be a faithful Catholic. You'll start looking for something to hold on to, and that will be it. Trust me. I see it coming." "Not a chance. I like my freedom, and I like the church. I can't be a Catholic and have my freedom, so I'll watch from afar." The waitress stopped by and dropped off the drinks. Ashlynn took a small sip of the dark amber liquid. She wasn't a fan of mixed drinks, but this one wasn't bad. "So, if this is such a big story, why haven't any of the major newspapers reported on it?" "They will, which is why I want you to break the story first. Think about it. Boston is a Catholic town. How many of the reporters at the large newspapers are Catholic? You think they want this story out there?" It made sense. The church was powerful in Boston. Publishing something so scandalous would be a bold move. "What else have you heard about this story?" Ian tilted his glass to his mouth and sucked down the drink. He looked rejuvenated when he returned his gaze to Ashlynn. He was the cool priest. Looked like a hippie back in the late 1960s. He would spend a lot of time with the teenagers, played a guitar. You know the time. There were whispers at first and then complaints. Parishioners wrote letters to the bishop and cardinal, so they moved him around. Some say it's because psychologists advised them that would be best, but these types of things aren't solvable, you know. I don't know. I'm not a psychologist, but unsolvable sounds about right. You ever hear anything like this around Detroit? No, but there was this priest, a Jesuit, who wrote stories about the Vatican. They were less than flattering. Tell her about the other thing you heard, Layla said. Oh, from Chicago. Yeah. Oh my gosh, Ash, you will not believe this. All right, now some of this is verified, so you can check things out. What you can't find is the rumor that all this started back in the late 1960s in South Carolina. There was some type of ceremony that brought all this into the church. Ashlynn threw her hand in the air. Yeah, that's all conjecture. That book I mentioned, the one written by the disgruntled Jesuit, I've heard he was a little odd. Besides, his books were fiction. What about the story Father Denton told us? Layla asked. Oh my gosh, you didn't believe that, did you? About the communists infiltrating the church. That was just his opinion because of his stance on Vatican II. Ash, you must admit, things are continuously deteriorating in the faith. Maybe there is a plot to destroy the church. And maybe if you do this investigation, you can help save the church. The church is fine, and like I said, I'm not religious. And this is ridiculous. I will not chase myths. But what if it's true? What if Satan has slipped into the church? Ashlynn took a longer sip and slammed the glass down on the table. You know what? I was considering doing this, but I can't lower myself to this type of nonsense. She pulled the money out of her purse and tossed it on the table. I can't believe you drugged me out of the house for this. I'm heading back home to look for a job. See you later, Layla. Ashlynn stormed out of the bar, the cool evening air hitting her face as she power-walked through the dimly lit streets of Boston. She couldn't shake off the unsettling feeling that Ian's proposition had stirred within her. The mention of a priest from the late 1960s and rumors of dark ceremonies lingered in her mind, despite her best efforts to dismiss them as fanciful tales. As she walked, a cold shiver ran down her spine, causing her to quicken her pace. Glancing over her shoulder, she thought she saw a shadow darting behind a corner. Her heart raced, and she picked up her speed, determined to put distance between herself and whatever had spooked her. Just when she thought she had left her unease behind, a soft whisper echoed in the narrow alley beside her. Ashlynn froze, her breath catching in her throat as the whisper turned into a chilling chant that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. What was in that drink, she thought. Ashlynn scanned the area. What was happening? A strong wind rushed off the bay, pushing her off the edge of the sidewalk. She sighed and wrote off the chant as her mind playing a trick on her. As she rushed off towards her apartment, one this was sure. She didn't like Boston and should plan to leave as soon as possible. January 6, 2002. Ashlynn sipped her coffee as she reviewed the substitute lesson plans. After the bell, say a Hail Mary and the Pledge of Allegiance. Then pass out the newspapers and find a current event to discuss with the children. I usually use the main story on the front page. The newspapers will be dropped off in the office by 7:30. Pick them up before heading outside to meet the students. Pick one current event to focus on after 15 minutes of general discussion with the students. That gave Ashlynn plenty of time to head down to the office, grab the papers, place one on each desk, and head outside by 7:45 to get the kids lined up to come into the school. A note had been stuck to the desk when Ashlynn arrived. It was from the principal, informing her that Mrs. Shanley would be out for one more week. That meant Ashlynn could spend the next week covering her class. After it was over, she would be sad. It turned out that teaching in a parochial school suited her. The routines were like what she remembered from her time in Catholic school. The nostalgia was comforting. She'd been filling in for Mrs. Shanley for 2 weeks before Christmas for maternity leave. Even though it wasn't a permanent position, the job had given her a renewed purpose. After so many weeks of being unemployed, it was wonderful to get up each morning and have a job to go to. Ashlynn had applied for several positions at Catholic schools in both Boston and Detroit. She'd already decided that she would take the first job offer she received, regardless of where it was located. At 7:35, Ashlynn headed for the office. She was surprised to find the office empty when she stepped inside the doorway, but the newspapers were sitting on the secretary's desk. "Hello," Ashlynn called into the empty office. There was an uneasy stillness in there. Ashlynn walked towards the desk, the click of her heels echoing loudly. She looked around and listened for any sounds, but there was nothing. This was the story Ian told her was going to hit the newspapers. The one she had discounted for its outrageous nature. She located a stack of sticky notes, ripped one off, and pulled a pen out of her pocket. "I'll just leave a note," she muttered to herself. As she was informing the secretary that she was taking the newspapers, the headline caught her eye. Catholic Church allowed decades of abuse. She set the pen down, picked up the paper, and read it again. It was January 6th. Ian told her the story would break early in the new year. "Can I help you?" Ashlynn turned around to see the parish priest, Father Reams, standing behind her. "Ma'am, can I help you?" "Are you okay?" he asked. She held the newspaper out in front of her. The priest's creased forehead raised as he read the headline. Ashlynn could see his lips barely moving as he tried to make sense of what he was reading. After a third read-through, the priest looked up at her and asked, "Who are you?" His eyes were narrow and focused, glaring at her. "My name is Ashlynn. I'm subbing for the 5th grade class." Father Reams snatched the newspaper from her. "How dare you bring this lying filth into this school? I don't know that you're appropriate to be here. What are you? Are you even Catholic?" "Get this out of here," Father Reams said, grabbing the stack of newspapers off the desk and pushing them towards Ashlynn. "But I am scheduled to substitute." "Not anymore. Take these with you." He shoved the newspapers in her face. Ashlynn's heart was racing. "We no longer require your services," he declared. "Get out of here." "Father Reams, please." The priest reeled back with the newspapers and shoved them against her chest, sending her falling to the floor. The papers scattered around the floor, underneath Ashlynn's body. She scrambled to get to her feet. Father Reams was standing behind her. His eyes blazed with disdain. Ashlynn stood up and thought about protesting, but there was an unnatural shine to the priest's eyes. His lips rose around the edges of his teeth, and he left out what sounded like a growl. Ashlynn froze and watched the priest's face twist into a gnarled mask. She wasn't sure what was happening, but she was terrified. Ashlynn turned and ran as fast as she could. She sprinted down the hallway, her heart pounding in her chest. The image of the priest's contorted face haunted her thoughts as she raced towards the exit. The school hallways stretched out endlessly before her, the sound of her own ragged breaths echoing off the walls. As Ashlynn burst through the school doors, the crisp morning air hit her face like a welcome shock. She stumbled out onto the steps, her eyes scanning the area for any sign of pursuit. Breathing heavily, she realized she still clutched one newspaper tightly in her hand. Glancing down at the headline once more, the words seemed to jump off the page at her. The shocking revelations about decades of abuse within the Catholic Church sent a shiver down her spine. Ashlynn's mind raced with questions and fear, unsure of what to do next. She rushed in towards her car. As she reached the parking lot, Ashlynn fumbled in her pocket for her car keys. She dared not look back, afraid of what she might see. The sound of Father Reams' footsteps grew closer, and she could feel his presence looming behind her. With trembling hands, she finally located her keys. Opening the door, she slid behind the steering wheel and drove off without looking back at the school. 1. Detroit, Michigan, 2015. "Miss Breyer, I need to see you in the camera room." Ashlynn wasn't sure what to make of the request. Why would she need to look at the cameras? She hoped it wasn't because she'd come in early a few days the previous week. Principal Connor's voice boomed over the loudspeaker into Ashlynn's classroom. She was playing an interactive game with the students. When it was over, they would take a quiz where they would respond to questions on their Chromebooks. The kids were laughing and smiling. They loved anything that involved technology. Ashlynn hated to interrupt such a lesson. "And don't worry, Ms. Breyer. I am going to send Ms. Luciana up to your room to cover for you," Principal Connor said, coming over the intercom a second time. Ashlynn's face fell. She was in trouble again. "Kids, let's take a break from the game," she said. A chorus of sighs and complaints filled the classroom. Take out your library books and read. Be good for Ms. Luciana, and we'll be able to pick up where we left off when I get back." Within seconds, a tiny woman with silver gray hair tapped on the classroom door. "Come in," Ashlynn said. Ms. Luciana, a sweet small woman who'd worked in the office forever, came to the classroom. She gave Ashlynn a small wave before greeting the children with a boisterous hello. "Be good for Ms. Luciana," Ashlynn said, before heading down to the principal's office. "I know I'm not supposed to get here before 6 a.m., but sometimes traffic is light and I get here sooner than I planned to. Last week, I had a lot of papers to grade, so I came in early. I'm sorry if that's what this is about." "No, Miss Breyer. That's not what this is about. Please just follow me," Principal Connor said. Ashlynn followed him down the hallway to a small closet. St. John Vianney was one of 20 Catholic schools still operating in the city of Detroit. Located in a residential neighborhood that had seen better days, the school needed to be vigilant about safety. Orna Phillips, the secretary, was sitting behind her desk when they entered the camera room. "Hi, Ash," she said, an embarrassed look on her face. "Orna," Ashlynn said, nodding a greeting. "I'll leave you two alone," Orna said, grabbing a stack of papers off her desk and quickly shuffling out of the room. "Sir, what's going on?" He pointed towards the camera that overlooked the front of the school. A tall, thin, withered body paced back and forth on the front steps of the school. The man's skin was dark and leathery, dark circles under his eyes. Ashlynn moved close to the monitor, noticing the soiled clothes and blank pupils that threatened to pop out of their sockets. Her mouth went dry and her stomach churned. It was her brother, Raymond. It had been months since she'd spoken to him, but she'd hoped he'd stayed clean and was taking care of himself. During their last conversation, he'd told her he'd become a Reiki practitioner. "I have several clients. This might be what I've been searching for my whole life," he'd exclaimed. She couldn't believe he'd come to her job, but she knew exactly why he was there. He'd fallen again. "Miss Breyer, this man says he's your brother. Did you know he was coming here?" "No, I would never have anyone come to the school. We haven't spoken in months. I knew nothing about this. I'm so sorry." The principal held up his hands in a calming gesture. "I'm sure this is a surprise. But we need to take care of this as soon as possible. I fear for his safety, but I've already kicked him off the property twice. The third time, he asked for you and said you were his sister. Mr. Connor, I will handle this. He's in bad shape. Do you think that maybe you need to take him somewhere? I can give you the rest of the day off. It's almost over anyway. I don't want to leave work early." "No worries. We have someone who can watch your classroom for you. Just go take care of this, okay? This isn't good for the school. Parents will be here soon to pick up their kids, and if they see someone who—" He stopped, but Ashlynn's brain filled in the blank, "a druggie. If they see a druggie, they will question what type of Catholic school this is. I am so sorry about this." "I promise it won't happen again," Ashlynn said. The principal nodded. "Just take care of this." He turned to walk out of the room but stopped. "Oh, and Miss Breyer." "Yes." A parent called the other day with a question about some of the prayers we're teaching the kids. What was her question? She wanted to know if we were teaching the prayer to Saint Michael in Latin. He threw his hands in the air. "What's happening in your classroom?" "We're just learning about the faith. I'm teaching about the history of the church. The children have a lot of questions. It helps if you give them the full picture." "Miss Breyer, they're in 5th grade. They don't need the full picture. That's something they can discover over time. Make sure that you are sticking to the curriculum, especially the religious curriculum. We want to make sure they know." Under normal circumstances, Ashlynn would have pushed back. The curriculum that they were using for religious education was flat. It left out so much about the history of the church. It was like starting to read a book from the middle, which was why it didn't make any sense to them. Since her brother was going through withdrawal on the front steps of the school, she thought it better to agree to stick simply to the curriculum at this time. Yes, sir. I won't do anything like that again. Great. Good luck with this. I hope your brother is okay. Ashlynn watched her brother from the window of the camera room, her heart sinking as she saw him hunched over, clearly in distress. She quickly made her way out of the school building and towards Raymond. As she approached him, she could see the desperation in his eyes. "Raymond, what are you doing here?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. He looked up at her, his eyes bloodshot and unfocused. Ashlynn, I need help," he mumbled, his words slurring together. "I know you do. Let's get you somewhere safe," she said, gently helping him to his feet. Together, they walked towards her car parked nearby. As they drove in silence, Ashlynn couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions: anger at her brother for falling back into his addiction, sadness at seeing him in such a state, and guilt for not being there for him when he needed her. Raymond's unexpected presence at Ashlynn's workplace caught her off guard. She hoped it wouldn't affect her job, especially when it came time for contract renewals. "Can you wait here for a moment? I need to retrieve my things from the classroom," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I guess," Raymond shrugged, his shoulders slumping. "Can I come in?" Ashlynn quickly thought to herself that he smelled like he hadn't showered in days, and his shivering body showed he was experiencing withdrawal symptoms from drugs. "Just stay out here, okay? I'll be back soon." 2. "I'm sorry, everyone, but I have an appointment I forgot about," Ashlynn said, rushing into the classroom and casting a look in Ms. Luciana's direction. Her eyes were wide as she realized Ashlynn expected her to stay in the classroom with the kids. "Okay, class. We're going to stay on this subject," Ms. Luciana said. "Colton, will you grab the word search box from the back of the room?" Ashlynn said, calling on her best student and classroom helper. Colton smiled and nodded, his cheeks turning rosy. "Don't worry about anything, Ms. Breyer. I will help Ms. Luciana, and we'll see you tomorrow." Colton, dressed in a perfectly pressed white shirt, blue slacks, and immaculate black shoes, got out of his desk and headed to the back of the room. He carefully picked up a stack of papers, headed to the front of the room, and began passing them out. "They'll be fine with the word searches," Ashlynn muttered to Ms. Luciana as she grabbed her purse and laptop. "Ashlynn, what's happening?" Lucia asked. Ashlynn shook her head. "I owe you lunch, okay? Thank you." She hurried out of the classroom before Lucia could question her further. By the time she got back outside, Raymond was sitting on the ground, his head in his hands. Ashlynn sighed and went to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. He lifted his head from his hands. "Ash, I fell back into my old habits. I didn't know where else to go since you're my sponsor." His voice trailed off as he dropped his head again. Ashlynn tried to help him up, surprised by how little he weighed. "I'm your sister. That's even better than being your sponsor." "What happened?" she asked as she helped Raymond towards her car. He had the cold sweats and was shivering in her arms. Ashlynn led him to her car, opened the passenger side, strapped him in, and drove him to her house. At home, her dogs Bruno and Rex went crazy. They loved Raymond. He ran a weary hand over their heads, and a weak smile spread across his mouth. "Make yourself comfortable," Ashlynn said before heading to the hall closet and gathering blankets. She laid out towels in the bathroom and got one of the spare bedrooms ready. "Have you talked to Mom and Dad?" Ashlynn asked. Raymond shook his head slowly. "No. Please don't tell them. It'll kill them if they know that I relapsed." It was true. If any of their siblings or parents found out he was using heroin again, they might have banished him from the family. "We'll deal with it amongst ourselves." Ashlynn, who was exactly 11 months older than Raymond, had a special place in her heart for him. They'd always been so close. The thought of losing him in any manner, cutting off contact, or his untimely death due to drug addiction, were thoughts she couldn't bear. "Don't worry, we'll get you straightened out again. I want you to stay here if you need to, and maybe you'll come to church with me." Raymond shook his head. I know you think that stuff works, and maybe it does for you, but it doesn't for me. And I have a faith. It goes back to the ancestors. She'd heard it all before. Raymond had dedicated his life to the Kemetic religion. He participated in ancestor worship and used crystals and rocks. He literally talked to their great-grandparents, and even though Ashlynn told him that was strictly demonic and dangerous, he continued to do it. Raymond, I really think it could be helpful for you to come back to church. Maybe that's why everything you're doing isn't sticking. Raymond let out a little chuckle. You think I relapsed because I don't go to church? That's not what happened. I broke up with my girlfriend. It was a rough night, that's all, and I only did a little, but I know this isn't my future. And how do you know that? I got a message from an ancestor. Something better is working in the background for me. Bruno let out a loud bark. Ashlynn thought, even the dog knows this is dangerous, but she kept her mouth shut and listened to Raymond. You know, you can be spiritual without belonging to an organized religion. Not everybody has to be religious. I don't want to be stuck in some type of ritualistic worship. I want something free that allows me to fully express myself. Ashlynn considered engaging in the argument yet again, but she realized it wasn't the time to give Raymond a lecture. It was one she made many times, telling her brother that this faith he followed was dangerous. She'd read about human sacrifice, ancestor worshipping, and conjuring, all of which were associated with the religion Raymond was following. She knew people who practiced these elements of the Kemetic faith were immersed in the occult. Just trying to help, Ashlynn said. Why don't you take a nap? I'll make some soup. We'll get through this. Raymond smiled. That's what I need. He got up and headed for the bathroom. Ashlynn waited to hear the water in the shower begin to spray before she let out a loud, painful sigh. The dogs came over and comforted her. This is my life at 40. A single schoolteacher engaged in the futile pursuit to save her brother. There must be more to life than this. But so far there wasn't more, and Ashlynn didn't understand why. She felt defeated. Her life revolved around her career, which wouldn't be so bad if she was allowed to teach. Sadly, as an educator, teaching was far down the list of responsibilities, a fact Ashlynn didn't know before becoming a teacher. There was a time when educators were valued, and people admired the profession. Now, it felt like a dead-end job that paid a little more than customer service positions. Ashlynn had moved back to Detroit in mid-2002 and taken a job substitute teaching anywhere she could. Sadly, a few years after her return, Raymond began to use drugs. He'd fallen at work and was prescribed painkillers that turned into a vicious addiction. When his doctor would no longer prescribe the medication, he'd turn to the black market. Ashlynn had remained supportive of her brother, but her dedication to helping Raymond beat his addiction had limited her life. She'd bought a home in one of the poorest sections of Detroit during the economic crisis in 2008. The quaint bungalow was cozy, but she had a burglar alarm, 2 dogs, and a .45. If trouble arrived at her door, she could handle it. Life was okay, but this was not what she'd had in mind. Where was her family? Why couldn't she find a decent man to marry? God has a plan, I think. At least I have you guys, Ashlynn said, rubbing the heads of the 2 mixed-breed medium-sized dogs. Bruno stood on his hind legs and barked for a treat. Rex took the rubs in silence. Ashlynn headed to the kitchen and grabbed the bag of dog treats, giving Bruno and Rex 2 apiece. Bruno barked for more after devouring the first round. Rex began to whine and chase his tail. You 2 are lucky to get treats. Dinner is being served in an hour, Ashlynn said. She shook off the dreary thoughts and began preparing dinner. She'd make homemade chicken noodle soup to help nurse her brother back to health, like she'd done before. While she was slicing carrots and celery, she remembered how lucky she was. Even though there were things she wanted and didn't have, she was thankful for her life. 20 minutes later, Raymond returned to the kitchen. He'd scrounged up a pair of sweats and a t-shirt he'd left at Ashlynn's the last time he'd spent the night. The shower had washed away the grin from his face, and now he looked more like himself. "You need my help." His voice was calm and even, but a hint of exhaustion seeped through his words. She hoped his relapse was over, even though history told her he would fall again a few more times before checking himself into a residential rehabilitation program. "Why don't you rest, take a nap? The soup will be ready in about an hour." "I'm capable of helping," Raymond said. "I made a mistake, and I appreciate you helping me. Let me pay you back in some way. Tomorrow night, I'm going to Adoration. You should come." Raymond folded his arms over his chest. "Why?" "Just come with me. We haven't gone anywhere together in a long time. After Adoration, we can do something you want to do, like to see a movie or go to dinner. You see this?" Raymond said, pulling a silver chain out from underneath his shirt. "This is an ankh. It symbolizes a lot of things, but I'm wearing it because I want to tap into the energy it has to help me overcome this addiction. I can't go to a Christian church if I am committed to the faith of my ancestors. I want to be healed, and I know this is the way." Ashlynn considered objecting. Did he really think this symbol was going to heal his addiction? She thought about things she could say, but decided to just make the soup and leave the subject alone. Raymond had clearly stumbled down a dark path, and there was little she could do to help him. "Ray." Her voice was a mix of alarm and disbelief. His hair was an unkempt mess, and he'd put on the same stained clothes he had been wearing before the shower. But it was his eyes, those glassy, unfocused orbs, that told her all she needed to know. He mumbled something unintelligible, his hands gesturing wildly in the air, as if conducting an orchestra only he could hear. "Occult, transcending." The words slurred together, his sentence trailing off into a nonsensical murmur. "Raymond, look at me," she implored, reaching out to steady him as he swayed precariously. Her fingers brushed against his wrist, feeling the rapid thrum of his pulse beneath the skin. "Can you hear me? You need help." The worry that etched her features deepened. Her voice strained with the effort of pushing through his haze. "This isn't you. This obsession with the occult, it's pulling you down a dangerous path." But Raymond shrugged off her touch, his expression twisting into a sneer. "You don't understand, Ashlynn. It's bigger than us, bigger than your prayers and your trinkets." He motioned dismissively toward the rosary beads still clutched in her hand. "Please," she pleaded, stepping in front of him, blocking his aimless wanderings. "I'm your sister. I love you, and I can't watch you destroy yourself like this." "Destroy? No, I'm awakening. I'm transcending," Raymond retorted, his voice gaining a fervor that chilled her to the bone. He tried to sidestep her, but she held her ground. "Awakening to what, Ray? To nights you won't remember. To a life slipping through your fingers." "Enough," he shouted, the word echoing off the walls, mingling with the silence that fell heavy between them. She could see it in his eyes, the wall he had built around himself, impenetrable and cold. "Okay," she whispered, feeling the defeat wrap around her like a shroud. "Okay, Ray." Her eyes never left his face, searching for the brother she once knew, the one who laughed easily and dreamed openly. Now all she saw was the shadow of him, lost somewhere behind those distant glazed eyes. "Think about it, please," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, knowing that her words were as fragile as spider silk against the storm raging within him. As Raymond shuffled to the kitchen table, Ashlynn's gaze fell upon the rosary beads, her last conversation with God resonating in her mind. Her fingers tightened around them, a silent prayer for her brother's salvation and a plea for the strength to guide him back from the precipice. Ashlynn's hand trembled as it reached out to steady Raymond, who swayed like a reed in the wind. His breath reeked of substances she dared not name, and his once vibrant eyes were dull with the haze of his intoxication. "Raymond, listen to me," she implored, her voice barely containing the panic that threatened to spill over. This isn't you. You need help." "Help," he scoffed, jerking away from her touch as if scalded. His posture stiffened, arms crossing defiantly over his chest. I don't need help. I've found my path. His words were slurred but laden with an unsettling conviction. Your path? Ashlynn echoed, the fear inside her crystallizing into frustration. You're talking about the occult, about these dangerous games you think are enlightening you. Enlightenment is exactly what it is, Raymond shot back, his voice rising in pitch, a note of desperation underlining his conviction. I've seen things, Ash, felt powers that your closed mind could never comprehend. Is that what you call it? Power? Ashlynn challenged, her own voice gaining strength. Because from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like destruction. Of course you'd say that, he retorted, his words slicing through the air like knives. You, with your prayers and your beads, clinging to some ancient fantasy of salvation. What do you know of true power? More than you think, Ashlynn replied fiercely, her resolve hardening against the onslaught of his contempt. I know enough to see that you're hurting yourself, Ray. That whatever you're chasing is leading you deeper into darkness. Darkness is where the truth lies. Raymond bellowed, his face contorting into a mask of anger and scorn. And I won't be saved by the likes of you. The tension between them snapped like a taut string, and their words collided in the space that had once been filled with laughter and sibling camaraderie. Now only a chasm of discord stretched out, threatening to swallow them both. Then what will save you, Raymond? Ashlynn asked, her voice breaking as she took a step closer, reaching for him despite the vitriol. What will it take for you to see what you're doing to yourself? Nothing you can offer, he spat, stepping back, his eyes alight with a fervor that bordered on madness. I've found my enlightenment, and I'll follow it to the ends of the earth. Even if it destroys you. Tears blurred Ashlynn's vision, her heart aching as she watched her brother retreat into the shadows of his own making. She knew then that her pleas were falling on deaf ears. Even so, she wouldn't give up on him. Not yet. Never. Can we just eat? Raymond asked, ignoring her question. She nodded, and scooped a soup into a bowl for him. Raymond's mood changed, and as they slurped the last of their soup, he broke the uneasy silence and began speaking in a casual voice. I think Michigan is turning around, so there should be more steady work soon. I've been able to find some construction job. That's great, Ashlynn said, forcing a smile. She wasn't sure his asset was correct. The economy seemed to have endured irreversible damage. With a declining population, construction wasn't likely to boom in Michigan soon. I'm looking forward to making you proud. Check in with me in 6 months and see where I am. Ashlynn focused on her soup and avoided making eye contact with Raymond. It was a nice thought, and she wanted to have faith in her brother, but she didn't want to be let down again. This wasn't the first time Raymond had told her he was changing his life. I hope the soup was okay, she said, switching subjects. Oh, it was great. Perfect. Thanks, sis. Raymond winked at her before pushing back from the table and heading to the spare bedroom down the hall. 3. Once Ashlynn finished tidying the kitchen, she dedicated the rest of her evening to grading papers. As she sat at the dining table, surrounded by stacks of papers, a strange sensation washed over Ashlynn. It started as a tingling at the nape of her neck, then slowly crept down her spine, sending shivers through her body. She tried to brush it off as fatigue from a long day of teaching, but the feeling persisted, growing more intense with each passing moment. Suddenly, the papers in front of her fluttered, as if caught in a gentle breeze. But there were no windows open, no fans blowing. Ashlynn's heart raced as she watched in disbelief as the papers lifted into the air, swirling and dancing around her in a whirlwind of white. A chill filled the room, and Ashlynn's breath hitched in her throat. She knew then that she was not alone. Slowly, she turned her head to see a shadow in the corner of the room. A voice echoed in her mind. Ashlynn closed her eye and vigorously shook her head. When she opened her eyes, the shadow was gone and her head was clear. After getting ready for bed, she kneeled down and closed her eyes, her knees pressed into the plush carpet beside her bed. Her hands clasped together tightly, knuckles whitening around the rosary that had slipped through her fingers moments before. With each whispered Hail Mary, a tear would escape, tracing a salty path down her cheeks. She raised her face to the ceiling, to the heavens beyond, her eyes shimmering with unshed emotion. "Lord," she began, her voice barely audible above the hush of nightfall, "I am lost at sea and I cannot find the shore. My brother is slipping through my fingers like water, and I fear what awaits him in the depths. Give me strength, give me a sign. Show me how to be the lighthouse in his storm. Guide me to my purpose." Her words hung in the air, a testament to her helplessness and fervent hope for divine intervention. As silence enveloped her once more, Ashlynn's heart thrummed with an intensity that seemed to echo off the walls of her small bedroom. Gradually, her sobs subsided, leaving behind a quiet determination. She released the rosary, letting it rest against her thigh, a symbol of faith amidst despair. The moonlight spilled through the window, casting ethereal patterns across the room and illuminating Ashlynn's resolve. With a steadying breath, she wiped the remnants of tears from her cheeks, feeling the coolness of the night air dry the dampness on her face. Ashlynn stood up, her movements deliberate and firm. She straightened the ruffled edge of her bedspread, an act of putting order back into her world, one corner at a time. The next morning, she woke up to the sound of the back door slamming shut. Bruno barked and tilted his head, staring at Ashlynn. She sat up, startled. Both dogs looked at her and launched into a cacophony of barking. Remembering that Raymond had stayed the night, she rushed out of her bedroom and down the hallway. The bed was made and Raymond was gone. She knew what he was doing. If her brother felt the need to leave the house at 5 in the morning, he was headed out to find a dealer. The dogs had followed her down the hall. Both were standing behind her, quietly watching. Ashlynn had work in a few hours. There was no time to head out and search for Raymond. She knew his haunts, but there was no guarantee he was on foot. Detroit didn't have mass transit, so she assumed he had called someone for a ride. She would have to wait until after work to track him down. They hadn't talked much about how long he'd been using again, but Ashlynn could tell he hadn't reached rock bottom. If he was rushing out at this hour, his descent hadn't started yet. The pattern was easy to follow. Every time Raymond started this familiar dance, he began with falling out of touch. Ashlynn had called and texted over the past few months. She thought Raymond was upset over the conversation they'd had about his spiritual endeavors. Hoping that things would eventually blow over, she'd stopped reaching out and decided to wait for him to contact her. She had expected him to send his signature one-word text message eventually, and the channel of conversations would be open again. But Raymond hadn't been mad. He'd been spiraling down in a drug-induced decline. Was he planning on coming back to her house? He couldn't stay with her if he was using drugs again. She turned on the light and immediately noticed a shadow underneath the bed. Ashlynn bent down, climbed under the bed, and picked up a silver ring with an eye in the middle and a series of shapes that resembled hieroglyphics. The ring was heavier than she'd expected. She turned it over in her hands and inspected the band. There were letters etched on the inside of the band, R.B. Raymond Breyer. Ashlynn rolled her eyes, realizing that this ring was probably part of his immersion in paganism. As much as she hated her brother was dabbling in paganism, and even though she wanted to toss the thing, she knew it was wrong to get rid of his property. It was unattractive and clunky, but she knew Raymond would look for it when he returned. She placed it in the nightstand's drawer and went to get ready for work. Ashlynn pulled up to her house that evening. Before getting out of the car, she noticed an old Monte Carlo with tinted windows parked in front of the neighboring house. She let out a sigh and sat in her car, pretending to dig through her purse for something. The neighborhood she lived in was infamous for abandoned houses and drug activity, so seeing a running car on the street made her anxious. She kept her head down, but glanced through the rearview mirror as a woman approached the driver's side window from across the street. After a brief conversation, Ashlynn watched as they exchanged items through the cracked window, before the woman scurried away and the car sped off down the street. Ashlynn sighed again, grateful for having a place to call home, even if it wasn't in the safest area. She hoped that one day, when property values increased, she could move to a more secure neighborhood. She grabbed her bags, got out of the car, and headed for the house. The dogs were barking in tandem when she opened the door. "Thank you two for being so vigilant. I can't take the cig with me to school, but at least I know you two have my back," she said, bending down to rub and hug the dogs. "I think you two deserve treats before dinner for being excellent watchdogs. We'll have to be quick though, or else I'll be late for my date." Raymond hadn't returned. She'd sent him text messages and called during her lunch break, but he hadn't responded to any contact. Ashlynn was worried, but there wasn't much she could do. She considered calling her parents or other siblings, but let things ride for a couple of days. Raymond didn't want the rest of the family to know, and Ashlynn knew there was a real chance they would cut off all contact with him. Hopefully he would call or come back to her house soon. As Ashlynn settled in for the night, her mind kept wandering back to Raymond. She couldn't shake off the worry that gripped her heart. Every creak of the house made her jump, hoping it was her brother returning. But the hours passed by in silence, with no sign of him. Restlessly tossing and turning in bed, Ashlynn finally drifted off to sleep in the early hours of the morning. It was a fitful slumber plagued by dreams of Raymond in various states of distress. She awoke with a start as the first light of dawn filtered through her curtains. The Calling by Braley Parkinson. 4. The following day, Ashlynn was once again summoned to Principal Connor's office. Furrowing his brow, Principal Connor tightly crossed his arms against his chest. She could see the veins bulging in his jaw as he ground his teeth together. "Ms. Breyer, please take a seat," Principal Connor said, gesturing towards the chair across from his desk. Ashlynn sank into the chair, her thoughts racing as she tried to figure out what she could have possibly done wrong. "Ms. Breyer, you know we really love having you here, but these stunts you pull, why?" "Mr. Connor, I'm not sure what you're talking about. Your word searches and puzzles have terms we don't use anymore." Colton, your little helper, gave a brief speech on regation days when one of the other kids asked what that meant. Ms. Luciana did not know, so Bryson rose and told everyone that they could find the regation days in 1962 Roman Missal. Now, where did a 10-year-old boy, who was born long after the 1962 Missal was phased out, learn about regation days? They had questions about the current Missal we use. Bryson asked if it was the only one the church used, and I guess I gave them a little tour of the Missal. You know, Bryson likes through explanation. So do the other kids. I don't think it will hurt them to know that there were other Missals used before the current on. Principal Connor ran his hands through his short blonde hair. "Ms. Breyer, do me a favor and take everything that wasn't printed by the church in the last 10 years home. No Latin, no regation days, or anything else like that. Norva Ordo English hymns, and if the kids want to hold hands during the Our Father, let them do it. Why is it wrong to give them the history of the church? It's their history, our history. Why are we hiding?" Principal Connor pushed away from his desk and stood up. "We're done. You'll either follow the rules or not. If you value your employment, you'll do what's right." Ashlynn left school that day with a box full of items she knew Principal Connor wouldn't want in her classroom. By the time she arrived home, Ashlynn had pushed the events of the day out of her mind. It was Friday, and for the next few days she wouldn't have to worry about school. Also, it was the one night of the week she had plans. Ashlynn had a standing date on Friday evening at 5. For the past year, she'd been driving to the next town over and sitting in quiet contemplation in front of the Blessed Sacrament. Each week, she prayed for a sign or a message to help her understand what she was meant to do in the world. Ashlynn was waiting for guidance or someone to lead her somewhere, but so far she hadn't received any answers. She fed the dogs, played with them for a few minutes, and headed for the church. That night the wind was picking up, and thunder was rumbling off in the distance. Ashlynn pulled into St. Anthony Catholic Church parking lot just after 6. Her adoration partner, Eric Cole, was not there yet. She hoped he came before the 2 people serving the previous hour left. At least 2 people needed to be present for adoration. He better get here soon, she thought, shaking her head as she headed toward the church. Ashlynn pulled open the large, heavy Gothic-style doors and walked into the church. Father Baraka was standing in the foyer. "Ashlynn, I've been waiting for you." "Hello, Father. What's going on? How are things?" "To be honest, not well. But thanks for asking." "What seems to be the problem?" "I feel like my life is a waste. My job is not a place where I can make a difference, and since I don't have a husband or a child, I don't know why I'm here. What is the point of my life? I come here every Friday night for adoration. I show up every Sunday, and I do my best to be a good person. But my life feels so worthless." Father Baraka adjusted his thick-rimmed glasses. A pair of milky eyes stared back at Ashlynn. "Remember to be patient," he said. His thick Tanzanian accent made the quiet words hard to hear, but Ashlynn knew what he was going to say before he said it. It was a refrain he'd repeated to her many times. "Father, I've been patient, but nothing is happening. I feel like I'm coasting through life. I'm not happy, and I feel like a failure. Surely God wants more from me than what I've given so far." Father Baraka always listened and weighed the situation before answering. This evening was no different. He waited for Ashlynn to finish before asking, "What are your questions? Why don't I have a husband? Why don't I have children? Why don't I have the type of life that means something? I need some meaning, and if it's not in those ways, then I want to serve God. I want to save the world. How do I save the world from where I am right now? My principal won't even let me teach the faith properly." "I see. So, as usual, you do not have small questions." Ashlynn stopped for a moment. The slight smirk on his face made her laugh. "Not exactly what you want to hear at the end of a long week." "Well, yes and no. I am glad you are asking questions, but the answers you seek are not easy." "No, they aren't. I have big questions, and I'm not getting any answers. I need something more." "When you say save the world, what context do you mean?" "I mean just that. I want to save the world and help end some of the pain and suffering I see. So many people seem to have lost their way, and it's killing our humanity. When I take my last breath, I want to know that I brought some good to this place, that I saved lives." "You don't feel that your teaching allows you to do that?" "My teaching doesn't even allow me to teach. It's definitely not going to allow me to save the world." "I want something more," Ashlynn said. "Have you considered religious life?" "I have. But I don't feel like that's the answer. I want to be out in the world more. In order to save this place, I need to be out there. A great deal of those in religious life are outside of the world, and while they do great things, I don't think that's the right path for me." Father Baraka smiled and nodded. "Your birthday is on the 26th of this month, right?" Ashlynn's eyebrows raised. She was surprised that the priest knew her birth date. There were over 1,000 families registered at St. Anthony's. It would take great effort to remember any of the parishioners' birthdays. "Yeah. What does my birthday have to do with anything?" "I have something for you. I couldn't bring it up before now, and I can't answer questions about it, understand?" "Not really? What is this about?" Father Baraka took out a pen and crumpled gum wrapper and carefully wrote a name and phone number on it. "Do not mention this to anyone. For this to work, you need to keep this completely to yourself. Do not tell me what happens at this meeting. You call this number and tell them your name. They will know how to help." "What is this? Whose number is this?" "Ashlynn, do not ask any more questions. I can't give you any answers. Take this number, call it, and go from there. Whatever happens, never tell me or anyone else about it. That's the only way that this will work. Do you understand?" "I don't know if I can agree to that. I don't know what's happening." She was curious about the number, but she wanted a clue about who would be on the other end of the phone before calling. "Ashlynn, your priest just gave you a phone number. How bad could it be? Call the number, and you'll have answers to your questions." The dogs were waiting at the door. Rex jumped up and danced on his hind legs, and Bruno ran around in a circle, chasing his tail. "Hey," Ashlynn said, rubbing their heads. Bruno barked, and Rex took the rubs in silence. Ashlynn headed to the kitchen and grabbed the bag of dog treats and handed some to Bruno and Rex. The paper felt like a stone in Ashlynn Breyer's pocket as she sat on the edge of her neatly made bed, the silence of her apartment amplifying the tumultuous thoughts swirling in her mind. She had spent the evening after Mass lost in contemplation, wrestling with the notion of destiny and divine intervention. That small piece of paper was an anomaly in her ordered life, a symbol of potential chaos, or perhaps the answer to her whispered prayers for a purpose. With a steadfast exhale, Ashlynn retrieved the slip from her pocket. Her fingers trembled ever so slightly as they unfolded it, revealing the number once more. The unknown priest's words echoed in her memory. "There is work to be done, and your heart has been chosen." She reached for the antique phone by her bedside, its rotary dial a relic amidst the modern world, a testament to her love for things with a story. Her heart thrummed a rhythm of anticipation and fear, each pulse a step toward the unknown. "Guide me," she whispered again into the stillness before she dialed the number. The line trilled a haunting melody, each ring a step deeper into the unfolding mystery. Ashlynn held her breath, waiting for an answer, for a sign that she hadn't simply imagined the encounter at church. And then a click. Silence followed, not a voice but a weighty quiet, testing her resolve. "Hello," Ashlynn ventured, her voice steadier than she felt. "Go to the Holy Sepulchre Cemetery. Midnight next Friday. Do not delay." The line went dead, the command delivered with a certainty that brooked no argument. Ashlynn's hand lingered on the receiver. Next Friday was her birthday. Midnight on her birthday. She couldn't ignore the symbolism, the feeling of being led. With renewed determination glinting in her eyes, she prepared herself for what lay ahead. "I need you to meet me at Holy Sepulchre Cemetery, Friday night, just before midnight. You'll get more details when you arrive." "Why at a cemetery?" The man on the other end of the call sighed in frustration. "This isn't a time for questions. I will answer what you need to know when I see you in person." "Okay. I'll do my best to make it." "No. Don't do your best. Just be here. It's vital that I speak to you that evening. Your first task will need to be carried out immediately." Task? What was this all about? "If you could give me a hint about what I will be doing." "I'll see you at the cemetery on Friday. I know it's your birthday, but make sure you're sober and alert when you get here." This man seemed to know an awful lot about her, and she didn't even know his name. "Where will you be in the cemetery?" The man was quiet for a minute. For a moment, Ashlynn thought the call had disconnected. "Don't worry about that. I'll find you." "Okay. What's your name?" The phone went dead. She wasn't sure what had just taken place. Would she actually met a stranger in a cemetery? Probably not. She shrugged off the call and decided she'd wait to make a decision. Maybe she'd be there, maybe she wouldn't. Ashlynn's 40th birthday arrived without fanfare. She wasn't sure what she'd expected. Nothing seemed to have changed except for the day. This isn't so bad, she thought, as she made her way through the day. She wondered if she would hear from Raymond. Hearing from her siblings and parents on her birthday had been a tradition since she'd reached adulthood. She didn't see them often for a variety of reasons, but it brought back sweet childhood memories of birthday celebrations. After work, Ashlynn had several voicemails. She listened to them the moment she got home. "Happy birthday, sis. We're so busy this week with soccer and basketball practice for the kids, but we'll have to get together soon to celebrate. Love you, big sis." It was the fourth message on Ashlynn's phone. Her two sisters and her parents had called to wish her a happy birthday, but there was nothing from Raymond. She wondered if she should search for his usual haunts. Maybe she'd do that over the weekend, but tonight she had plans. Ashlynn kicked off her shoes, looked in the full-length mirror on the back of the closet door and said, "Happy birthday." The phone rang while she was changing into shorts and a t-shirt. The name flashing on the screen shocked her. She hadn't talked to Layla in years. Her old roommate had stuck it out in Boston, taking the story about the church scandal to new levels. Layla had written hundreds of articles on the topic, from which she launched a successful freelance journalist career. Ashlynn has distanced herself from Layla over the years, but they still chatted every couple of years. She considered letting it go to voicemail, but something told her she should answer it. Layla. Happy birthday, Ash. How are you? Good. How are things with you? Great. I'm calling because I've heard a rumor that the Catholic population in Michigan is dropping rapidly. There has been some discussion online that there will be less than 1 million Catholics in Michigan within the next 5 or 10 years. Care to comment? Ashlynn rolled her eyes. She wasn't a statistician, and even though she taught a Catholic school and had begun faithfully attending church a few years before, she wasn't an expert on anything. Would the Catholic population dwindle in Michigan? Probably, but all demographics were dwindling in the state. Layla, I appreciate the call, but I have plans tonight. Oh. Really? Hot date? No. Girls' night out? No. Please don't tell me this has something to do with the darn church. Ashlynn hesitated. Oh my gosh. Ashlynn, you know I have a friend who hasn't had any success with online dating. He lives in Ferndale and he runs a candle shop. You might hit it off with him. Layla's friends tended to be people Ashlynn didn't want to spend much time with, let alone date. That had been true since college. She politely declined the invitation, made an excuse, and ended the call. She powered down her phone, changed, and went to play catch with Rex and Bruno in the yard. Later that night, she ordered takeout from a Thai restaurant and vegged out on the couch until 10 that night. She was starting to drift off, but reminded herself that she was meeting a mysterious man in the cemetery at midnight. It was the most excitement she'd had socially in a long time, but part of her thought it was a terrible idea to go to the meeting. What do you say, guys? She asked the dogs. Should I go? Rex moaned, and Bruno lifted his head and tilted it as if to say, maybe. I need a definitive answer. Bruno stood up and walked over to the couch. Rex looked around and followed. I guess that's a yes from you too, but I don't know. What if this is some type of trick? Bruno nudged his nose against her hand as if to say, come on. That doesn't make sense. Was she going to prepare for bed or head for Holy Sepulchre Cemetery? Was she going to be putting her life in danger? Father Baraka had given her the number. Surely it couldn't be anything too nefarious, but meeting a stranger in a cemetery at night wasn't a good idea. Fortune favors the brave, Ashlynn muttered, realizing that if nothing else, it would be good to have a little adventure in her life. 5. The night had been quiet and calm, but an ominous cloud slipped in front of the moon as she pulled out of the driveway. By the time she hit the corner of her street, low, full-bodied thunder was rumbling in the background. A large raindrop smacked against her windshield. A full-blown downpour was underway within a few minutes of her leaving the house. The escort hydroplaned as she tapped the brakes. What is happening? She muttered, working hard to keep the car on the road. When she hit Telegraph Road, the streetlights went black, leaving her squinting to see the road. The wind howled, and visibility declined rapidly. Ashlynn considered going back to the house, but what if this was her only chance to find out what her destiny was? And what if, as crazy as it seemed, the weather and electrical malfunctions were working hard to keep her from getting to the cemetery? More determined than ever, she gripped the steering wheel and pushed her face close to the windshield. Peering out into the darkness, she silently prayed and forged ahead. She had crossed the border between Detroit and Southfield when the streetlights came back on. Feeling relieved, she loosened her grip and sat back in her seat. That was when she saw them. A pair of dark eyes peering at her through the heavy rainstorm. Oh my gosh. What is that? Ashlynn said aloud. As the car approached the eyes, They stayed still in the middle of the road. She honked her horn, but the steely gaze never wavered. Laying her hand on the horn, Ashlynn yelled, "Move!" But the four-legged creature stayed put. What was it? She couldn't be sure, but just as she was about to swerve into the oncoming lane, the creature disappeared. She wanted to look back and see if maybe it had been a deer, but the rain was still too heavy to take that chance. Holy Sepulchre was an old cemetery dating back to the mid-1800s. It was positioned in an area where most homeowners had several acres accompanying their property, so no one lived very close to the cemetery. It was at the top of a steep incline, which the escort struggled to traverse. The gates were open, even though the sign said the cemetery closed at sunset. Ashlynn drove towards the mausoleum, noticing that the rain had slowed down a bit. After parking, regret set in. She had no idea who she was meeting, or why it had to be in a cemetery at midnight. She glanced at the clock in the car's dash, 11:57. She'd made it just in time. She grabbed an umbrella from the back seat, stepped out of the car, and immediately spotted a figure dressed in a black hooded cloak. The figure moved towards Ashlynn. Her heart was thumping against her chest. Who was this person? Was he dangerous? When the figure was a few inches, a quiet voice said, "There is no need to be afraid. Follow me into the mausoleum." "Let me see your face," Ashlynn said. A hand emerged from underneath the long cloak and pushed the hood back. The thin, youthful face of a man who could have passed for a high school student surprised her. His short, thick, curly hair glistened in the rain. "Satisfied," he said. "Your name?" "Father Sixtus." "Your real name?" "That is my real name." "No one is named Sixtus." "I am." "What is the name of your parish?" "Precious Blood." "How long have you been a priest?" He hesitated. "Not that long, but I am a priest." He seemed rather put off by the question, but Ashlynn thought it was logical. She had no proof he was someone she could trust. "We need to hurry." "Why is that?" Ashlynn asked. "Please. Let's go." Ashlynn followed the priest into the mausoleum, closing her umbrella once she was inside. "Thank you for coming. We have little time, so please only ask the necessary questions." "Okay. What is this about?" "You've been summoned because of your devoted faith and honest nature, but I have to know that you're ready to die for your beliefs." "I'm here." "What does that tell you?" The priest nodded. "It says something. I also must know that you can keep a secret. Who knows you're here?" "No one." "Great. Come into the cellar," Father Sixtus said, motioning for her to follow him towards the back of the crypt. Ashlynn hesitated. Was this man truly a priest? "How do I know you're who you say you are?" Sixtus turned to face her. His dark eyes glistened from the glare of the raindrops. "You first truly believed when you were 5. You saw an angel at your great-grandfather's funeral and gained knowledge that many will never have. Over the years, you've tried to suppress the memory, but you know there is more than meets the eye. That is why you're at adoration every Friday night. You know there is much to pray about." Shivers ran through Ashlynn's body. She had told no one, except for the priest at her elementary school, about the angel she saw at her great-grandfather's funeral. How would this man, priest or not, know about that? "Hurry. We are running out of time." Father Sixtus rushed through the crypt door, throwing it open dramatically. Ashlynn, still stunned that he knew about the angel, followed him inside. They headed for the back of the crypt. Father Sixtus pushed open another door that led to a narrow spiral staircase that wound down to the basement of the building. Ashlynn hesitated. This felt like a horror movie. Meeting a strange man in a cemetery during a rainstorm, and now she was going to be stuck in a subterranean room with him. No one would hear her scream. "Come on," he said. His eyes were wide and impatient. She waited a few more seconds before following him down the staircase. Once they were downstairs, Father Sixtus pushed his hood back and stared at Ashlynn. His eyes were dark and piercing. The church needs your help. I'm always ready to help. No, you're more than ready. You're eager, desperate for a way to shine a light in the world, and that is what we need right now. But this assignment will be dangerous, and I have to know you will never reveal what you do or who you are to anyone. Ashlynn was confused. An assignment. People know who I am. I'm a school teacher, not an undercover cop or anything like that. Father Sixtus shook his head. I don't mean your civilian life. I mean the life I am about to ask you to take on. I have no idea what you're talking about. Of course you don't, he said. Let's begin. Okay. I'm ready. Have you noticed that the world has become increasingly dark? Well, yes. The city where you grew up is rife with murders and debauchery. Ever wonder why? I have my theories. I know you do, Father Sixtus said, grinning and shaking his head. It turns out that your theories are right. Evil is walking amongst us. Ashlynn shrugged. What's new? What's new is that the evil is now hard to distinguish from mental illness, poor conditioning at home, and trauma. Sometimes people come to me and want an exorcism, but what they need is a psychiatrist. I'm sure that doesn't happen too often, does it? Very often. No priest has the time to sort it out. It has become such an epidemic that there are people on waiting lists to be evaluated. That's terrible, Ashlynn said. What can I do to help? Father Sixtus held up a skinny finger and said, that is why you are here. You want to help. You want to save the world. We need more people like that. I want to be useful. And useful you will be, if you choose to take this assignment. Do I have to accept before you tell me what it is? Are you willing to trust the church? Yes. What does the church need? Father Sixtus held out his hand. Ashlynn gave him a firm shake. Have you ever met someone who is possessed? Ashlynn pulled her hand back from the priest. Yes, she had, but that wasn't something she was ready to talk about. So you have. I didn't say that. Your brother, right? Everyone thought he turned to drugs because he had mental illness, but you knew better, didn't you? Father Sixtus said. That's what happened to him. It wasn't drugs. He was using the drugs to keep the voices coming from a demon at bay. She was stunned. That was exactly what she thought when Raymond first fell prey to drugs, but her parents had convinced her that wasn't true. Possession wasn't something that happened anymore. At least, that was what her parents told her, but Ashlynn knew better. I don't want to talk about that, she said. Tell me what you want. It's not what I want. The church needs you to investigate cases and determine whether the person in question needs an exorcism. I am a lay person. Yes, but you know when a person is possessed. Besides, we're not asking you to perform a ritual or dabble in the rite of exorcism. That, of course, is only for a priest. We need something else from you. I think you'll be perfect because your faith is strong and you've endured doubts in the past. That's true for many people. Why me? Father Sixtus walked over to the small desk in the basement's corner and opened a laptop. After unlocking the screen, a video popped up. He hit play, picked up the laptop, and brought it over to where Ashlynn was standing. The video showed a group of young men, probably ranging between 14 and 19, playing basketball in the middle of a street. The basketball hoop was torn and hanging from the rim. Ashlynn watched the video for a few minutes. It looked like a typical game of pickup basketball. Laughter and jokes could be heard. But then one boy faced the screen. Ashlynn felt a thin line of sweat forming on her forehead. There was something wrong with him. She couldn't tell what it was, but something was off. She reached out and closed the laptop. You saw it, didn't you? Father Sixtus asked. I don't know what it was, but yes. One of the boys. Something was wrong with him. Show me which one. He opened the laptop again and hit the play button. Ashlynn watched for a few seconds before turning away. Her heart was racing. The boy in the blue shorts. He stopped the video. That young man was brought in 2 months ago because his mother thought he was possessed. He'd started selling drugs and had dropped out of school, but the last straw was when he hit his mother. She said he was speaking another language when he did it, and his eyes were white. She claimed he had no pupils at the time. When was this video taken? His father took it months before the changes happened. At that time, he was just a normal kid, but you saw something in him. Imagine what we can do if we can catch these cases before the demon makes major progress. Ashlynn was having trouble taking it all in. Yes, she knew she was special in that she could feel things more than others, and sometimes she saw things no one else could, but spotting possessed people before anyone else knew they were possessed, that was a bit much. Your first assignment is in your neighborhood. What? Wait. What type of training do I get? You have everything you need. What more are you looking for? Am I going to fight demons? How susceptible to possession will I be? Father Sixtus folded his arms across his chest. Fair questions. To be honest, I don't have answers right now. Why are you in charge of this? What? Giving me this assignment. You look a couple of years older than my students. Father Sixtus turned his chin up. I am here because... well, okay. No one else wanted this job. After you identify a person you think might be possessed, I will interview them and provide a second opinion. After that, I pass it along to the exorcist in our diocese. And no, I can't tell you who. Father Baraka is the exorcist. How do you know that? We talk all the time. I wasn't sure if he was the exorcist, but you just confirmed it. You're very perceptive. That's good, because your first assignment will be tough. What is it? Did you hear about that drive-by shooting that took place a few blocks over from you? I literally heard it. My dogs were going crazy when that happened. Well, a mother came in the other day. She thinks her son is the one who committed that crime, and worse yet, she also thinks that he may have murdered several other people over the past few years. She said he abruptly changed about 2 years ago, and last week she found a pentagram scrawled under his bed. Have you met him? Not yet. I'm waiting for your evaluation. Wait. I need to know more, Ashlynn said. Her head was spinning with questions. Father Sixtus threw his hands in the air in frustration. Okay. What do you need to know? First, what's the story behind your name? He smirked. My mom thought it sounded cool. Really? She'd expected a long, drawn-out story about the significance of being named after a long-dead pope. My parents are hippie types. They don't like organized religion, but both were raised Catholic. That doesn't really mean anything these days. They used to involve me in all types of weird, not very holy rituals. But anyway, what are your other questions? Why is this happening? You mean the proliferation of evil? Yeah. It's always around, but it feels like it's worse now. He motioned towards a small black office chair with wheels on the bottom. You're going to want to take a seat. This won't be easy to hear. Ashlynn hesitated for a moment before sitting down, her heart pounding in her chest. She fixed her gaze on Father Sixtus, waiting for him to unravel the mysteries that haunted her mind. Father Sixtus took a deep breath and spoke, his voice low and filled with gravitas. Evil has always existed in this world. It lurks in the shadows, waiting for an opportunity to strike. But in recent years, there has been a shift. A darkness has been spreading its tendrils further and further, corrupting souls and minds. Ashlynn felt a chill run down her spine as she listened intently. What do you mean by a shift? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Father Sixtus leaned forward, his eyes intense. There are whispers of a great evil awakening, a force unlike anything the world has seen before. Some say it's a sign of the end times, while others say it is just a chastisement. Either way, the world is going to get worse, much worse, before it gets better. We need soldiers who are ready to fight this great evil. 6. Ashlynn walked over and sat down on the chair, using her feet to keep it from moving. The office was a small sanctum of unease, quiet amid the chaos that had taken hold of Detroit. Ashlynn leaned over Father Sixtus' desk. Maps and ancient texts lay spread out before them on the desk, resembling an arcane puzzle waiting to be solved. The soft glow of the desk lamp cast long shadows across their faces, enhancing the gravity of their meeting. "This is a long and unpleasant story," he started. Father Sixtus paced the floor. In the late 1960s, after the Second Vatican Council, there was a cardinal here who started reforms. It was incredibly jarring for everyone involved, from what I've heard. One Sunday, parishioners attended their parish that had looked one way for 50 years. But the following weekend, the cardinal had removed the communion rails, brought the altar forward, and required the priest to face the parishioners. It was so sudden that many left for Eastern Catholic churches or Eastern Orthodoxy. There were many who didn't like this, but the changes were happening so fast no one knew what to do. Some people wanted to know what the document from the big meeting in the Vatican said, but a lot of priests struggled with what was happening too. There was a sense of loss and hunger for a leader among the laity. Unfortunately, some priests took it as a license to interject their own ideology. As you know, Detroit has had its fair share of tensions. This cardinal honed in on the problems and said that they were because of conservative stances of the church. Eventually, we saw hymns being sung in the Mass, and things became less reverent. People asked, "Why am I here?" And then, with all the scandals, it was just another reason for people to turn their back on the church and walk away. Even as a priest, I understand. The laity was right. All the changes didn't make us better. We lost too much in translation. Ashlynn agreed, but she wasn't sure that this had to do with demons. "You're wondering why I'm telling you this, right?" "Yeah. The evil is happening now. I agree that things weren't implemented well after the Second Vatican Council, but I'm sure that didn't invite demons to our city." He held up his index finger. "Not so fast. Let's talk about what really happened here. Have you heard the story about the rituals in the Vatican and South Carolina?" She couldn't help but roll her eyes. "Not this again." "Yes, but that book is a novel. It's not real." Father Sixtus folded his arms over his chest and paced faster. "Have you been to Hart Plaza in downtown Detroit?" "Of course." "Have you noticed the fountain built to honor Horace Dodge and his son?" "Yeah. It's an odd-looking fountain with a circle in the middle, right?" Father Sixtus nodded and folded his arms over his chest. "Is it just an odd fountain with a circle in the middle? Or is it a portal?" Ashlynn wasn't sure what to say. She'd heard rumors about the various statues in downtown Detroit, but she hadn't given it much thought. "Do you know what city has the largest satanic temple membership?" "I'm going to guess it's Detroit." "Correct. I guess in a way I can feel the evil." One side of Father Sixtus's mouth lifted into a smile. "Now you're being honest with me." "Good. And yes, you can feel it, and that's why you're here. I'm sure other people can feel that something is wrong here. We need someone who knows what's happening in the city, in the metro area. Someone who can help us discern whether we're dealing with demonic possession, mental illness, or lifestyle choices. I'm not a psychologist." "Right, but you know when you're dealing with evil." "But I..." He threw his arms in the air. "I know you know. We've been watching you. You can feel when something is off, just like with the fountain in Hart Plaza. You wanted more involvement. Now you'll be a key component in the battle between good and evil. Eventually, it could get physical, so keep yourself in shape. We never know what's going to happen." "What does that mean?" "As society becomes more secular, there will be a push to get rid of anyone who is religious. It will be subtle at first, but in time, expect escalation. We may need warriors, and while we will use men if we can, the second line will be women. Why is that? Because there are lots of women who want to serve. She'd been praying for direction. Now that it had arrived, she hoped she could live up to the occasion. Is there a chance that we allowed ourselves to be formed by the world? Yes, but even that is not why we're in this position. We allowed people to bring in outside forces. If you read the documents, they're beautiful, a springtime in the church, and it could have been that, but they were players behind the scenes who wanted something else. They didn't want a springtime in the church. They wanted to end the church as we knew it, and now we're dealing with many problems. It's easy to sleep in on Sunday and fall into a routine of not going to Mass. I see it every week. The pews are a little emptier every Sunday. Ashlynn had noticed. The older generation was dying off. Parents no longer make it a priority to get their children baptized or confirmed, and those that came had sporadic attendance. You are a teacher. What don't they allow you to teach? The truth. Do you know why you can't teach the truth? Because it forces people to ask questions that have hard answers. That's what's happening now. People like you are asking questions, but most aren't curious enough, or they aren't observing the changes. They end up asking questions, getting discouraged, and then they leave. Will this position entail any physical battles? I think that there is a point where we will have to fight for our faith. The time is coming, and when it does, we're going to need warriors and true believers. Things have taken a turn for the worse. If all these changes happened in the 1960s, why is it all coming to a head now? Good question. Do you remember what happened on Detroit's 300th birthday? I remember it. There was a celebration downtown, but I didn't go down there or pay it much attention. Father Sixtus held up his hand. That was a mistake. Many of us made that mistake. They commissioned several more statues and sculptures to celebrate Detroit. They installed portals. Do you know why? We were already losing our faith. He nodded his head. Ashlynn felt her heart race. Portals. What was happening in her hometown? What were you doing in 2001? Ashlynn closed her eyes for a moment to think. It had been so long since she'd thought about the awful months she'd spent in Boston in late 2001 and early 2002. I was in Boston, Ashlynn said, hoping she could leave it at that. She didn't want to get into how much she'd hated living there. It was the worst time of her life. You weren't having a good time, were you? No, but what does that have to do with anything? The words pushed her back in time. She remembered the events and how painful it had been. Ashlynn had been in Boston, working her first job out of college. She hated it there. It was too busy. The hustle and bustle of the Northeast wrinkled her Midwestern temperament. But that wasn't the only reason she hated Boston. Why did you come back to Michigan? I was having trouble finding a job. The place was too expensive, and I needed to come home. You were there when the scandal broke. Ashlynn nodded. 2 days after seeing the ominous headline about abuse in the church, she received a mysterious call from one of her old professors, Father Dallin. Remember that it's not the people that make the faith. It's the faith that makes the people. It had been a strange conversation. He'd been her teacher in college and had written a letter of recommendation for her upon graduation, but this unexpected call was odd. They communicated little outside of the classroom, although she had attended presentations on campus about the history of the church. I was in Boston for a few months. I graduated in 2001 and took a job there, but I hated it. I was laid off after a few months, and then there was the scandal. After that, I found a job here and headed home. Your life was not in a good place. Right, Ashlynn said. You don't need to rub it in. I'm not, but think about it. In 2001, the celebration of the city took place. You ignored it, and you probably didn't feel the bad energy brewing, but there was a push to end the church. There are some dark forces that are jealous of the 2,000-year history we have. They want us done. Detroit installed more portals, and witches and warlocks went to these stargates and conspired. The abuse scandal hit soon after that. The Boston Globe put out articles about abuse on a daily basis. Eventually, the stories began to trickle out of Detroit. There were reports about priests who had sexually abused people. Do you think that was all coincidence? It had been such a painful time to see her faith diminished and lost. At the end of college, she reconciled herself with the faith. To lose her relationship and to have a scandal involving her faith had pushed her into a deep depression. Father, I don't even know what to make of all of this. Have you noticed there is a fresh scandal every few years? What do those scandals have in common? The scandals are from long ago, Ashlynn said. Yes. Priests who are nearing the end of their earthly journeys. Those are the ones that we keep hearing about. They cause a rift. They won't destroy the church, but they might diminish the church's influence in the world, and that is the goal. So right now, we have seen a vast decline in belief overall, and the fewer people that believe, the more power evil has. If you believe nothing higher than yourself, then you are your own God. Yes, I am aware, Ashlynn said. What can I do? I don't understand why I'm here. Only priests can perform the rite of exorcism. Correct, but you won't need to know that for what you will be doing. You and all the people with strong faith have the power to push out demons. Are you sure I have the power to push out demons? Yes. Your faith and prayers can do that. You don't understand how powerful you are. You think they're not working, but look at where you are now. This results from prayers. All those nights in adoration, or those Sundays when you didn't feel like getting up for church, but you did it anyway. The way you love your students and fight for them in ways other teachers don't. Ashlynn Breyer, you're special, and we have noticed. You asked for a calling, and now you have it. Do you accept? Ashlynn felt a surge of emotions, confusion, fear, doubt, but also a spark of something else deep within her. She had always felt a yearning for something more, a higher purpose beyond the mundane existence she had settled into. The words of Father Sixtus resonated with her in a way she couldn't explain. Taking a deep breath, she met the priest's gaze with newfound determination. I accept, she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts in her mind. Father Sixtus nodded approvingly. Good. You'll be stepping into a realm that many shy away from, but remember, you are not alone. The strength of your faith will guide you, and the prayers of those who believe will surround you. Now, someone else is going to join us. Father Baraka emerged from a small room down the hallway. He smiled as he walked towards Ashlynn. Father Baraka. Yes. I've come to help as much as I can. Father Sixtus paced the length of the small room, his hands clasped behind his back, brow furrowed in deep thought. The church, he began, his voice heavy with a pensive gravity, once a beacon of light, seems to have dimmed its vigilance. Indeed, Father Baraka agreed, leaning forward in his chair, the light from the stained glass casting kaleidoscopic patterns across his dark robes. It's as if the hierarchy has become more concerned with politics than with the spiritual welfare of its flock. Ashlynn watched them both, her heart drumming a steady beat in her chest. She had grown up within the embrace of the church, but had felt the same sense of unease that now resonated in Father Baraka's words. Reports of possession, sightings of apparitions, whispers of rituals darker than the night itself, Father Sixtus continued, turning to face the crucifix adorning the wall. They are met with skepticism, or worse, indifference. His hand rose to his chest, over his heart, a silent testament to his distress. Complacency is the ally of evil, Father Baraka added solemnly. When we fail to acknowledge the presence of darkness, we give it free rein to corrupt and destroy. A shiver ran down Ashlynn's spine. This was what she had been searching for, a purpose that called to her soul. Here, in this room, was an acknowledgement of the threat she had sensed lurking beneath the surface of everyday life. Protection of the innocent isn't just physical, Ashlynn spoke, her voice clear and certain. It's spiritual too. I've felt it, this pull to do more, to be part of something that stands against such forces. Both priests turned to regard her, their expressions a mix of surprise and respect. It was one thing to speculate about evil, it was another to commit oneself to facing it head-on. In Ashlynn's firm stance and resolute gaze, they saw a kindred spirit, one who understood the gravity of their mission. In the dim light of the small room, a silence hung as heavy as the ancient tomes lining the shelves. The air was thick with the weight of unspoken resolve. Ashlynn's heart raced, each beat resonating with the gravity of their conversation. She could feel it, the cusp of something momentous. "Then we must unite," Father Sixtus said suddenly, breaking the hush that had settled over them. His eyes met Ashlynn's with an intensity that seemed to see right through her. "Action. We must fight back." Father Baraka nodded in agreement, his dark eyes alight with a fire born from years of battling unseen forces. "Together, we shall stand as sentinels against this encroaching darkness." Ashlynn's breath caught at the proposal. They would push back against the shadows, threatening to engulf Detroit. "Us three," Father Sixtus continued, gesturing to encompass the trio, dedicated to shielding the city from the demonic forces that seek to claim it. The words ignited something within Ashlynn, a fierce determination that surged through her veins. It was as if she had wandered in search of a beacon and found a bonfire. This was her calling, this was where she was meant to be. Her life, until now punctuated by restlessness and a yearning for meaning, had prepared her for this very moment. "Yes," Ashlynn replied, her voice steady and imbued with newfound purpose. "I'm with you. I've been waiting for a sign, a direction for my faith to take. And now it's clear." Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, not out of fear but readiness. "I want to fight. I need to." Father Sixtus smiled, a grave smile that acknowledged the peril of their path. "This will not be easy," he cautioned. "It will test everything you believe, everything you are." "I understand," Ashlynn assured him, her resolve unshaken. The trials ahead did not scare her. If anything, they steeled her spirit further. She felt alive, every fiber of her being thrumming with the energy of a divine challenge accepted. "Then let us begin," Father Baraka declared, extending his hand toward Ashlynn. Father Sixtus did the same, and Ashlynn placed her own atop theirs, a pact sealed not just in flesh but in faith and fortitude. Their hands remained clasped together for a moment longer, a silent vow to guard, to protect, and to wage war against the malevolent tide rising within the city's heart. Ashlynn's pulse echoed in her ears like a drumbeat, a rhythm to march to, a herald of the battle to come. "Okay. There's more to hear. Are you ready?" Father Sixtus asked. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and incense as Ashlynn sat across from Father Sixtus and Father Baraka, at a sturdy oak table nestled in the back of Holy Sepulchre. The small room, lit by the flickering light of a single candle, felt removed from time and place, a hidden sanctum where plans of great consequence were drawn. "Information is our sword and shield," Father Sixtus began, his voice echoing slightly off the stone walls. "We must know the enemy, understand their movements, and predict their strikes." "Indeed," Father Baraka chimed in, his eyes alight with an intensity that spoke of many battles fought in unseen realms. "Knowledge is power in this war. We must identify those afflicted by evil spirits with precision. Mistakes can cost souls." Ashlynn nodded, absorbing every word like a sponge. She had always believed in the presence of good and evil, but now she was on the front lines of a silent war, one that lurked behind the veneer of everyday life. "Exorcisms may become necessary," Father Sixtus continued, his hands clasped as if in prayer. "It's a delicate process, requiring faith and fortitude. But we'll cross that bridge when we come to it." "Which brings us to where we should begin," Father Baraka added, leaning forward as he spread out a map of Detroit on the table. His finger traced the intricate web of streets until it paused at several marked points. "These locations have known paranormal occurrences, unexplainable events, sightings. They are stains of darkness upon the city. An abandoned hospital on the east side," he pointed first. "It sits like a hollow shell, but locals avoid it, whispering stories of chilling screams that pierce the night. Then there's the old industrial district, His finger moved to another spot. Reports of shadows moving against logic, defying the natural play of light. Lastly, the riverfront. Father Baraka's finger halted again. There, the waters sometimes run contrary to current, and people speak of an overwhelming sense of dread filling them without cause. Ashlynn studied the map, a sense of urgency building within her. These were not just places, they were battlegrounds, each with its own hidden menace that threatened to seep into the veins of Detroit. "Let's start with the hospital," Ashlynn suggested, her gaze fixed on the corresponding dot on the map. "If it's as active as you say, it might give us a clearer picture of what we're up against." "Hold on. Before we start with places, we need to help people," Father Sixtus replied. "And we proceed with caution. Not only for our safety, but to ensure we don't alert these forces that we're onto them." "Caution, yes, but also with courage," Father Baraka said, meeting Ashlynn's eyes. "For the heart that is firm and whose conscience approves their conduct will pursue their principles unto death." "Unto death," Ashlynn repeated softly, her voice no more than a whisper, yet carrying the weight of an unshakable commitment. The stakes were clear, and the path ahead was fraught with peril. But she was ready to follow it, wherever it would lead. 7. Ashlynn wasn't sure if she was ready to fight with demons, but she'd asked for guidance. There was finally a calling for her. Was she ready to live up to the request the church had made on her life? "Tell me what I must do." "You'll need tools. Rosary, crucifix, and holy water." "Do you know Latin?" "I know prayers in Latin, but I'm not entirely fluent." "Good enough, but you'll need to get better with Latin," Father Sixtus said. "If you hear things from demons, don't respond, but make sure you remember what they say, so you can relay it to me." "Can I record conversations?" "Absolutely not. That's all the church needs, recordings of demons." "Have you heard the recordings of Anneliese Michel, the young woman from Germany?" "Was the exorcism in the 1970s?" "Yes. The priests recorded the exorcisms. Both priests faced prosecution for her death, and now the recordings circulate around the internet. That young woman's raw pain has been on display for decades. Think about how terrible that must be for her relatives." Ashlynn felt guilty. She'd searched for the recordings a year ago, and listened to them out of macabre curiosity on Halloween night. Initially, she thought it was going to be a fun, spooky night, but the recordings felt prophetic. The next day, she went to Mass for the first time in over a decade. "Okay. I won't record anything." "Good. Do you have a gun?" "Several." "Why?" "Most of the cases we're getting are in Detroit. I know you grew up there, but we don't want you getting hurt. Please be safe." Ashlynn had a license to carry a gun, but she didn't like carrying a lethal weapon around for day-to-day tasks. She'd use discretion. If she had to go to the seediest parts of town, she would need to be armed. "Okay. Anything else?" "Yes. Your first assignment," Father Sixtus said, heading for the small office on the other end of the room. "Byron Danvers's mother came in a few months ago. She's not religious, and the boy has only been to a few holiness churches with his grandparents. Byron Danvers's mother visited the small office a few months ago. She's not religious, and the boy has only attended a few holiness churches with his grandparents." He wrote an address and gave Ashlynn a picture of Byron Danvers, a 15-year-old boy who would be her first case. She studied the photo. The young man looked like the average teenage boy. He was standing in front of a small brick bungalow with a slanted smile. He was dressed in a white polo and black pants and holding a sign that said, "First day of high school." His eyes, bright and warm, exuded innocence. "I don't see anything in him," she said. "The trouble started after this picture was taken. Don't make up your mind before you set up a meeting." "When should I go to see him?" "Immediately, Father Sixtus said." "Time is not our ally," Father Sixtus said, his voice a low rumble that underscored the urgency in his eyes. "These occurrences, they're growing in strength, in boldness. Whatever is out there, It's escalating. Ashlynn nodded, her own experiences giving her more than enough reason to believe. She felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders, the need to act pressing down like a physical force. I'll call them tomorrow. We have to get ahead of this before more people are hurt. Ashlynn was home by 2 a.m. that morning. She wasn't sure what to make of the meeting. Dealing with demons was a bit more than she'd hoped for. What if the people she met with were truly possessed? How would she deal with an actual possession? The dogs were barking wildly when she walked through the door. They didn't run down the hall and greet her, which was very unusual. They were standing outside of the spare bedroom. The door was closed. She wondered if her brother was back. She stopped breathing for a moment. What if he'd come back to sleep off a drug binge, and he'd... She couldn't even bring herself to think that something had happened to Raymond. Ashlynn rushed down the hallway and shoved the door open. Bruno and Rex rushed into the room, growling and barking at the corner of the room. Ashlynn couldn't figure out what they were upset about. Raymond wasn't there, but the dogs were extremely upset. Boys, back up. She grabbed their collars and pulled them away from the corner. After getting both out of the room, she shut the door and turned on the light. The strange ring Raymond had left behind was sitting in the corner of the room. She was sure she'd put it in the nightstand. What was it doing on the floor? Ashlynn went to pick up the rung, but when she reached down, it vanished. A murmur of words too faint to make out passed by her ears. Her heartbeat quickened as she backed away from the corner. She opened the door and rushed out into the hallway, slamming the door. Bruno and Rex were whining and running in circles. Had the ring moved? She looked at the door, wondering if she should go back into the room. Ashlynn thought about all the things she'd heard that night. The dogs were still barking. "Come on, boys," she said, leading the dogs to the kitchen. It took a few moments for them to follow, but the possibility of treats overcame their vigilant barking. She pulled a bag of treats from the cabinet and gave both dogs 3 treats apiece. They ate and calmed down. Ashlynn headed back down the hallway and hesitated outside of the door. She put her hand on the doorknob and took a deep breath. She opened the door and headed inside. The room was still. Nothing was on the floor. Ashlynn went over to the corner and double-checked. There was nothing there. Ashlynn went over to the nightstand and opened the drawer. The ring was sitting in the drawer. She hadn't picked it up. How did it get back into there? Something was going on, but she wasn't sure what. If Raymond didn't come back and get the ring soon, she would throw the ring out. Something was off with it. 8. The next morning, Ashlynn called Candace Danvers during her prep hour and made an appointment for that evening. "You can come any time before 11 o'clock tonight. I work midnights and must leave at that time," Candace told her. "I will be there at 6 tonight." A heavy sigh filled the phone. "Thank you so much. We need you." That evening, Ashlynn packed a rosary, crucifix, Bible, and the small container of holy water she kept in the bureau drawer by her bed. Bruno and Rex watched as she slipped the items in a bag. Both dogs let out little moans as they watched her. "Don't worry. I'll be back soon," she told them. Bruno barked once, and Rex ran off to hide underneath her bed. "I hope you two don't know something I don't," Ashlynn said. The Danvers lived 3 blocks from her house. She pulled down the dead-end street and parked in front of the bungalow from the picture. "God, please be with me," Ashlynn muttered before getting out of the car. As she reached for the doorbell, the front door flew open. "It's about time. We've been waiting for weeks. Thank you for coming." Ashlynn smiled, but she was feeling a bit lightheaded. She wanted to take a few days to digest the task she was undertaking, but Father Sixtus urged her to act immediately. Now she was officially on her first assignment. What exactly was she doing? When she asked Father Sixtus, there'd been a long pause. Eventually he said, "I think you'll know." That wasn't comforting. Ashlynn didn't know what possession would look like, or what she should do if she encountered a possessed person. How could she tell the difference between possession and mental illness or physical illness? She didn't feel suited for this, but she had been praying for months for something that would make her service to the world more meaningful. Now she was standing on a porch 2 blocks from her home, with her hands shoved in her pocket. One hand was wrapped around the rosary, and the other held the small bottle of holy water. "Well, come on in and get a look," Candace whispered. She was well over 6 feet, with a strong build and a pretty face. Heavy eyeliner, her slightly slanted eyes enhanced her look. Her thick and wavy hair was pulled back into a single ponytail that reached the middle of her back. After she told Ashlynn to step inside, she placed a hand on her back and practically shoved her through the doorway. "What took you so long to get here?" Candace questioned, her voice barely audible. Ashlynn wasn't sure what to say. She'd only heard about Candace and her son a week ago. "I came as soon as I could," she said. The house was much like Ashlynn's. There was a small front room and a bedroom on the first level. A staircase between the front room and the kitchen led to a second level that Ashlynn assumed served as a bedroom. Modest furniture lined the walls of the neat and clean house. "His room is upstairs," Candace said. "I'll try to get him to come down, but you might have to go up there." "It's fine, wherever we have to do this." Candace's eyes widened with fear. "It won't be us. You're going to have to go up there by yourself. I won't go in that room." Shocked at the prospect of being alone with a boy who may or may not be possessed, she fought to keep her composure. "Okay. Let's get started," Ashlynn said. The 2 women walked to the bottom of the stairs. "Byron, I need you to come down here," Candace said. "Will you come down here for a little while?" Her voice initially started out strong. With each word it faded. Ashlynn contemplated telling Candace that she had to leave. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. Perhaps she'd been too fast to accept this assignment. Father Sixtus hadn't provided much information. Now she was on her own in a house where a woman wouldn't even go into her own son's bedroom. Ashlynn listened carefully, but the room upstairs was silent. "Byron, we need you to come down here. If you don't come down, I'm sending her up." Candace's voice quivered. She was terrified. "Is his father in his life?" Ashlynn asked quietly. Candace stepped away from the staircase. "Keep your voice low. I don't want him getting mad at me. And no, he's never met his father." "Do you know who his father is?" Candace put her hands on her hips. "What do you think?" "I don't mean to pry, but it might be related to how your son is behaving," Ashlynn said. "I know who he is, but he wants nothing to do with Byron. He's never done nothing for him." "Does Byron have trouble in school?" "Byron doesn't go to school." As Candace answered the questions, Ashlynn realized how ill-equipped she was for this situation. She had 15 years of experience as a teacher, but other than that, she did not know what questions to ask. "Has he seen a psychologist?" "School social worker, psychologist, psychiatrist, counselor, whatever name you call them by, he's seen them. None of them have been of any help." "Okay. Has he had any juvenile offenses?" "Yes. He's in and out every few months. They won't keep them. They don't have enough room." "Has Byron's father had any run-in with the law?" Candace smiled and tilted her head. "Would it be possible for me to speak with him?" "If you want to take the time to find out which prison he's in, go ahead." "I don't chase that butterfly," Candace said. "But before you leave here, I want to hear your prognosis for my son." A low guttural growl crept down the stairs. "Do you have a dog?" Ashlynn asked. Candace shook her head. "That's Byron. Sometimes he growls like a dog or a wolf. Please do something." I went to the priest, hoping that he would help me. "He said you'll be able to help." She looked at Ashlynn. "But you don't look like you have any type of special powers, so I don't know what you're gonna do. But at this point, I've got a long night ahead of me, so let's get started. Like I told you, I work the midnight shift. I must get some sleep soon, so if you're gonna do anything with Byron, You need to head up there now." "Okay," Ashlynn said. She moved closer to the stairs, reciting the prayer of Saint Michael in her head. "Sancta Michael Archangeli, defend nos in proelio." She placed her foot on the first step. As she tried to move her other foot to the next step, a hot, powerful gust of air blew against her body. "Contra nequitium, et insidias diaboli, esto praesidium." Ashlynn forced the rest of her body onto the staircase. "Enum pere illi deus, supplices deprecamer, tuque." Now she was whispering the prayer aloud. She took another step. The hot gust of wind blew harder. "Princeps militiae caelestis, Satanum aliosque spiritus." Another step. She pulled the rosary out of her pocket and roped it around her wrist. "Malignos, qui ad perditionem animarum." Another step. "Prevagantur in mundo, divina virtute in infernum detrude." Amen. Ashlynn took the small bottle of holy water out of her pocket. The stairs creaked, each step letting out sorrowful moans. On the first few steps, the creak sounded like the settling of the house, but as she got closer to the top, the stairs sounded like they were alive. Angry moans increased in volume as she reached the top. Byron was standing in front of a window, facing away from her. Ashlynn remained at the top of the stairs, standing in the room's doorway, considering whether she should enter. The hot gust of air suddenly turned cold, convincing Ashlynn that whatever was happening in the bedroom was beyond this world. She decided to not enter the room. "Byron, I'd like to speak with you about some of the things that have been happening in your life," Ashlynn said, not sure if this was the right approach. "Byron, can you hear me?" The boy didn't respond. He stood completely still at the window. She wasn't sure what to make of it. Ashlynn turned around. She saw Candace standing at the bottom of the stairs, waving her hands in the air, motioning for Ashlynn to hurry up. She took a deep breath and took one step into the room. The moment her foot crossed the threshold of the doorway, the beige carpet turned into a red sea, and the murky liquid pulled her under fast. She struggled against the force dragging her down, the crimson liquid filling her lungs as she thrashed in panic. Her fingers clawed at the surface, desperately trying to find a way back to the safety of the room. As Ashlynn sank deeper into the red abyss, a sense of dread washed over her, chilling her to the core. Just when she felt her strength fading and darkness encroaching on her vision, a sudden burst of light pierced through the blood-red waters. Ashlynn's eyes widened in astonishment as a figure materialized before her, a spectral form with ethereal features and glowing eyes that seemed to pierce through her very soul. Ashlynn tried to back away, but she didn't have control of her body. The figure seemed to combust, spreading into millions of pieces. Each glowing shard transformed into a ghostly projection of various scenes from Byron's past. Ashlynn watched in horror as the fragments danced around her, showing glimpses of his tumultuous childhood and the darkness that had haunted him since birth. The room seemed to twist and contort around her, the walls closing in as if to suffocate her with the weight of the memories seeping from the very fabric of the house. Amidst the swirling images, Ashlynn caught sight of a familiar face, a shadowy figure lurking in the background of every memory, pulling invisible strings that led Byron down a path of despair and destruction. It was a presence she couldn't quite comprehend, a malevolent force that seemed to feed off Byron's suffering like a parasite. As she struggled to make sense of it all, a voice echoed through the room, cold and otherworldly. "You tread where you do not belong, interloper," the voice hissed, sending shivers down Ashlynn's back. She didn't know what to say or what to do. "Prayer, prayer," she reminded herself. Ashlynn tried to pull the words out of her mind, but suddenly she couldn't think of the words of any prayers. 9. Ashlynn struggled to pull herself out of the abyss. She grabbed onto the edge of what should have been the floor, but it crumbled in her finger and she sank down lower. Pairs of large dark eyes, hundreds of them, stared at her. Ashlynn didn't see bodies, but she could feel other beings. Struggling to get her bearings, she scanned the abyss for something she could grab onto, but there was nothing. Ashlynn couldn't get out. There was nowhere to go. She was floating in this red sea, and these creatures, with bodies she couldn't see, were all around her. Their eyes peered in her direction. She observed and tried to figure out what to do next. Go up, she thought. The moment Ashlynn tried to swim to the top, the collection of eyes formed a giant mass and contoured into a beast with horns and large sharp teeth. She opened her mouth to scream, but nothing came out. What was that thing? What could she do? As the beast rushed towards her, Ashlynn closed her eyes and prayed. Her mouth moved, but she could tell there wasn't any sound coming out. The words formed in her head, and she begged for mercy, help, redemption, anything to get her back to the doorway of Byron's bedroom. A great roar filled her ears, but she refused to see what was before her. Ashlynn closed her eyes tightly and held up the rosary, wrapping it around her wrist. She held out the crucifix towards the monster. The beast let out a high-pitched squeal and reeled back on its haunches. Ashlynn opened her eyes, feeling a surge of power run through her body. Slowly, the creature was falling back into eternity, and she, without doing anything, was rising up, headed to the surface. Now she could see the top. She closed her eyes again and continued praying harder. In her mind, she recited the Lord's Prayer. When she finished praying, she said, "Please be my guide. I don't know what to do with this young man." Ashlynn rose out of the abyss and stood inches away from Byron. He was still facing the window with his back towards her. She hadn't seen his face yet or heard his voice. Ashlynn debated what she should do. Should she reach out and touch his shoulder? Call his name? Or just pray? Fearful that whatever was going on with Byron might affect her, Ashlynn prayed. The boy was perfectly still in front of her, but upon hearing the words of the Lord's Prayer, the boy twitched. Suddenly, the boy shot up to the ceiling, claws appearing from his hands. Ashlynn stammered. His reaction shocked her, but she quickly resumed praying. The boy released his claws and dropped down to the floor with a thump and caused the room to shake. Ashlynn continued praying, raising her voice, feeling her strength increasing with each word. Byron scurried underneath the bed like a giant bug. She finished the prayer and crossed herself. Ashlynn knew somehow that her work was done. She carefully maneuvered out of the room while the boy was still underneath the bed, growling and snarling. Ashlynn closed the door and headed down the stairs. This time, they didn't creak or moan, and when she reached the bottom, the boy's mother said, "Did you do anything up there?" "I didn't hear a thing." "Did you even talk to him?" Ashlynn was stunned. His mother hadn't heard any of the commotion, but then she realized what she'd experienced might not be visible or audible to the naked eye or ear. Perhaps it was only real in the sense of what her eyes saw and her mind experienced. The situation became complicated. Byron needs an appointment with a priest. I will relay the message that it is important for the boy to have counsel soon. Byron's mother sighed and threw her arms around Ashlynn. "Thank you so much for this. I have been terrified, not knowing what to do." Ashlynn couldn't believe how calm her voice was, but she stuffed her trembling hands in her pockets. She called Father Sixtus as soon as she was in the car. The phone rang several times before the voicemail picked up. "It is my humble opinion that Byron Danvers needs an appointment with you and your team as soon as possible. Please don't keep this family waiting." She hung up, started the car, and headed home. She was nervous and unsure of what she'd seen as she drove home. By the time she reached her house, tears were running down her cheeks. What had she seen tonight? Had any of that been real? It must have been, but how could it be? Would those images be back to visit her in her dreams? She wasn't sure, but one thing she knew was that whatever had happened to Byron was evil. Ashlynn pulled the desk drawer open. The ring was sitting where she'd placed it when she first found it. She closed the drawer, left the room, and locked the door. It was Raymond's ring, but she couldn't keep it in her house. But what was the best way to destroy a cursed item? She thought about sleeping through the night in a house where there was an object that was moving around the house. Bruno and Rex were standing still and staring at her down the hallway. Should they leave? Ashlynn remembered what Father Sixtus had told her. Prayers had power, and she had holy water in the house. She'd lock the door, pray, and mark the door with holy water. In the morning, she'd pack the ring up and take it with her to the church. Father Baraka would know what to do with it. Ashlynn said the prayer of St. Michael, threw holy water on the door, and slept on the couch with the dogs curled up at her feet. Ashlynn tossed and turned that night and drifted in and out of slumber. Every time she fell asleep, she saw the image of the beast in the abyss in the Danverses' house. She spent most of the night praying and asking God to cleanse her of any residual effects of being surrounded by evil entities. After a few hours of fitful sleep, she got ready for church. The door of the bedroom was still closed, and nothing seemed to have changed since she'd laid on the couch. She fed the dogs, took a shower, and got dressed. When she exited her bedroom, Raymond was standing in the hallway. "Raymond," Ashlynn said, stumbling backwards. "You startled me." He was still. She headed in his direction, but stopped before she got too close. His eyes were dark. Too dark. "Hey, so I'm glad you're back. Where have you been?" "Around," he said in a low, calm voice. "Well, I'm glad you're back. We need to talk." "About what?" He seemed so relaxed and well-kept. Raymond usually returned from his drug binges, dirty and desperate. Perhaps she'd been wrong about her brother's relapse. "I found something in the room after you left." "What did you find?" Raymond asked. His head tilted to the side. "A ring." "Oh." He absent-mindedly touched his ring finger. "That ring, where did you get it?" "Why?" "Raymond, it's not a normal ring. Something's wrong with it." "Where did you get it?" she asked again. He ignored her questions and pushed the door to the bedroom open. Ashlynn followed him into the room and watched him go to the drawer, open it, and remove the ring. She watched him slip the ring onto his finger. How had he known where the ring was located? "Raymond, wait," Ashlynn said, following him out of the room. "Wait." She reached for his arm, but Raymond pulled away. Bruno and Rex both backed away from the hallway, cowering in the corner and whimpering. Raymond turned around and shoved Ashlynn's hand away. "Raymond, what is happening? I want to talk to you." Raymond continued walking out of the house. The roads were empty that morning. Ashlynn sped out to church and found Father Baraka standing out front waiting for parishioners to arrive. "I knew you'd be here early. I need your help. My brother left a ring at my house. It moved last night." His eyes widened. "We need to work fast." "Where is it?" "He came back this morning and took it. He knew exactly where it was, even though I'd moved it from where he left it." "Where did he go?" "I don't know. He's got problems." Father Baraka folded his arms over his chest. "This is disturbing. You have to find him, and when you do, you call me immediately and we will take care of this thing." "What type of ring is it?" Ashlynn pulled out her phone and showed Father Baraka the picture she'd taken. Ashlynn followed him into the church. "Osiris. Those etchings on the inside are stones." "Yes, I've seen this before." "What else can you tell me about your brother?" "He struggled with drug addiction, and he dabbles in the occult." Father Baraka shook his head. "This is terrible for your brother. Once you find him, we will work fast." "What needs to be done?" "Once you find him, we will need to destroy the item first. We'll burn it. It won't burn, but we'll do it anyway. After that, we will smash it and bury it." "Did anything else happen?" "No. I had my first assignment. Something strange happened. Is it possible that something came home with me?" "Let's hope not. I can come and bless your house, but the most important thing is finding your brother immediately."